Hi, families watching from home. We'll be starting in about 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you for your patience. Good evening.
Thank you for coming, everybody. We're going to start in just a few minutes. Trying to work out a couple of lines stream yet. Just arriving home from work now, and I'm going to share by 6. So we just want to make sure that we can take any questions from the people watching at home. We're going to start in a few minutes, regardless.
I see that we have 9 families watching from home. I hope your dinner is hot or you're in the process of getting dinner ready. If you're one of the families that's watching tonight from home, if you would just type in, I want to make sure that you can ask questions as they come up. So you can say, hi, Mr. Grant, I have sound, or I'm watching from home, and then we can check it on the other computer that I have set up so we can make sure that you can interface with us and ask questions like our live audience here. So if you're watching, just go ahead and type a short message so I can see that we're working. Oh, it's going to be backwards. Okay, welcome audience members at home. Welcome people who are here live. Thanks for taking the chance to come out and learn about the AIG process we have here at Washington, which is the same process that is used throughout Wake County. First, I just want to introduce the different folks who are here tonight to help share that process with you, and we're here to answer questions as well. Folks at home, I'm just checking our technology, and often when you live stream, you have the ability to ask questions, but I'm not able to see those on the other computer that I have. So if you have questions, you can email them to Mr. Bastin at BASTIN@WCPSS.net. That's BASTIN@WCPSS.net. And I'll monitor Mr. Bastin's email. If you have questions during the presentation, we can ask them to the audience here. So those people who are here live, it's always a little bit interesting talking to live and then back to our folks at home. So I hope we can give you the full attention as well. I'm Bob Grant, your principal, and this is just an overview session to talk about how the AIG process or identification process works, so you can kind of prepare your child and know what that looks like in the years ahead. We've got two amazing AIG teachers. We have Sandy Sandel, who's joining us this year. She's an experienced AIG teacher, spent many years at Brooks Elementary, and retired, and I got her to join us 50% because we're fortunate to have a full-time AIG teacher and a part-time AIG teacher. So thank you, Sandy. Yeah. She's going to be talking a little bit later in the program about the Explorers program. So we're going to share how do students get extra support in third grade, both to prepare themselves for the AIG testing process, but also to go in there and push their thinking a little further. Ms. Sandel also works with students through electives, and she also pushes in or pulls out students during the day in different grade levels to give them some extra enrichment. Many of you are familiar with Mr. Bastin, our full-time AIG teacher, who teaches many AIG electives and also oversees the AIG process. Yeah. So before he goes in and gets into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts, all of the information that you're going to see today, I sent out through Class Dojo this weekend. Did you get a dojo from me? So that has a PowerPoint attached. It's the same PowerPoint that we're going to be seeing here tonight. Folks at home, you're going to see everything backwards. So unless you're an incredible reader, you want to open up your own PowerPoint, and that was sent out through Class Dojo. If for some reason you're not on Class Dojo, please sign up. You can also email Mr. Bastin at BASTIN@WCPSS.net, and he'll send you a copy of that PowerPoint. But before he gets into kind of the nuts and bolts about what the assessment program looks like, I just want to talk about what it looks like in context of how we challenge and enrich kids here at Washington. So many of you have been here for multiple years, and you know what we do as far as gifts and talents and how we nurture students and how we push to have rigor. Our goal is to have excellence, and Ms. Brunson, our goal is to have excellence and rigor no matter where your child is. Whether or not your child is qualified for AIG services starting really in the midpoint of third grade, or whether they're a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, and so on. That rigor and challenging and pushing and differentiating kids and helping to have students strengthen their critical thinking, which is at the heart of both the AIG program. It's also at the heart of what we do as a gifted and talented magnet, right? Through our elective program, through the opportunities that we provide kids. So this is a piece of that. I don't want you to, as a parent, feel my child has to qualify for AIG services in order for them to be challenged or have a strong education. I've got two boys, they're 19 and 21, they're both in college. They both went through Washington. One tested for AIG in third grade, didn't qualify for AIG services. We had him retested in fifth grade, and he qualified. My younger son tested and qualified in third grade. Different kids develop differently. Also, having the AIG identification is really more critical when you're moving into middle school if you're looking at a middle school program that has an AIG basics focus to it, like ligand or carnage, because that in part will determine some of the classes that you're taking. Now, a lot of the middle schools that have the AIG basics program are really doing more to have a hybrid program. So if your child qualifies in either math or language arts, they're still taking a range of classes. In the past, if you didn't qualify in one or the other, you kind of got locked out of that track. I would still recommend that you talk to the principal or the counselor at Carnage or Ligand and now Moore Square to clearly define what their program looks like and how that serves kids. If you're not going to an AIG basics middle school, having that AIG identification as you move through middle school and high school really doesn't significantly impact the type of courses that you're taking. So at Washington, you're going to be challenged and pushed no matter where you are. You get this formal identification midway through 3rd grade, which can automatically qualify you for AIG electives. But we also have the in-house AIG elective program that we start recommending students for taking an AIG-based elective at the end of kindergarten. Mr. Basson will talk a little bit more about that AIG in-house recommendation when he presents. I'll be popping back and forth to help answer questions as we go through the program, but Mr. Basson's really going to get into the meat of these different pathways of how you qualify. When you look at this information and listen to it, it's a lot, and there's a lot of data in there and talks about, well, if you qualify with this certain score, then it allows you to take another certain test. Just kind of let that absorb in, but I would really recommend referring to the PowerPoint that has those different pathways. The bottom line is there's different ways that your child can qualify for AIG services. If they don't qualify this year, you can always ask to have them retested in 4th grade and again in 5th grade. And again, qualifying through this testing process is not going to be the determinant of whether your child is challenged and has a successful career here at Washington. If you have questions, you're free to ask them as we go through. If you start to get backed up a little bit and it takes more time, I might ask you to hold your questions for a little bit, and then we'll do more then at the end of the session. Great. Mr. Bastion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. So, like he said, I'm Bill Bastin, and this is Ms. Sandel. We are the AIG teachers here. First of all, thank you for letting us teach your amazing children. They truly are incredible. I see them in electives and at other sort of times during the day, and it never fails to amaze me what they can do when you challenge them and how they can rise to the things that you throw at them. I'm always making the things that I'm putting into my electives more rigorous, more challenging, and they keep on reaching those levels and pushing and pushing. So it's phenomenal. It's amazing. It really is. This is an amazing school. It's a very different school. If you've had children at this school and that's all you've known, just talk to some other parents, because other schools, and it only struck me recently when a parent was talking to me about some things they heard at the bus stop. They were talking to other parents about their school, and it just made the things they reported back to me, just made me very proud of teaching at this school. Having our amazing electives, whether the AIG electives or the non-AIG electives, which are always challenging the students where they are. Having this flexible, creative offering of rigorous electives is amazing. It really is amazing. And what your children do, whether they tell you what they do or not, it is also amazing. So when you say, how was school? And they say, good, drill in, because there's a lot of stuff to drill into. There's a lot of information there they might not be telling you. Just in the last few hours, and Ms. Sandel can talk about her electives as well, but just in the last, well, literally few hours, just as an example, we had students this year making three-dimensional buildings in architecture. We're tying in the vocabulary of architectural components like trusses, ceiling joists, collar ties, stud wall panels. And I won't ever tell the students what these things are. It's up to them to develop research skills to be able to work out what they're doing. We've had students creating electricity from windmills, this was from last year, which we took outside with the leaf blower. They're discussing the physics of electrical or generating electricity. Students that are creating movies with music and sound and images. which in animal studies, which was just a few hours ago. And we've got right back to literally the creation of the earth before there was any life. And again, the thing I asked them to do was this. It was difficult, and what they're bringing back to me is this, and it's incredible. We just set them with something challenging and let them run, and it is amazing. It amazes me. So thank you for sending them here. Thank you for spreading the word to other parents about how great it is here. I'm very privileged to teach here, and yeah, Washington is a fantastic school for sure. So this presentation, I always try to make my teaching fun, and in a sense, I guess I'm teaching, so I'll try and make this fun, but it's fairly difficult to make this presentation fun, but we'll have a go. There's a lot of information up here, a lot of words, a lot of numbers. You don't have to understand everything I'm saying to you. Just absorb what you can, email me with questions about what you're not sure about, and there may be questions neither of us are sure about, and then we can go to somebody else and find out for sure. But this is Wake County Public Schools' vision of well, it's kind of their overarching vision, really. WCPS says recognizes children have different needs. Wherever they are, we are going to challenge your children, whether they're struggling, whether they are identified, nearly identified, or anywhere else on that spectrum. Wake County is committed to ensuring all students are challenged to reach their full potential and be held accountable partners in their learning. They graduate in increasingly higher percentages and compete successfully as productive citizens. That's Wake County's vision, but at Washington, I would say we do this and beyond. We really take pride in producing kids who are going to turn into adults that can do amazing things in the real world and believe in themselves and their skill set. So, why? Why do we have AIG programs? Why would we identify students? Why would we test them and look at the numbers? And why would we possibly teach some students in some classes and other students in other classes? Well, here it's different. From the age of kindergarten in the 4th quarter, and then in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, your students might be in electives which are called AIG electives. They're not officially for AIG identified students because pretty much you wouldn't have the testing until 3rd grade. But those electives are designed to be offered to the students who are showing in the regular classroom that they need extra challenge, that they can handle the extra challenge. And if the teacher and myself, Ms. Sandel, feel it's appropriate, then those students will be selected for what we call the in-house AIG electives. It can be slightly confusing sometimes because a student might be in an AIG elective in 2nd grade, then they take the testing. But if they're in an in-house AIG elective, they will stay in AIG electives throughout their time at Washington, unless they are perhaps particularly struggling. It's just important to know that that is not an official identification. The official identification would come in possibly the 3rd grade year when every student in 3rd grade is tested for AIG. And those scores, which we'll go over in much more depth a bit later on, it's not just testing to see whether the students qualify for AIG or not. It gives you a valuable data point to say, where are they? I was speaking to a parent earlier on, and they were like, well, I know my student is strong, but I'm just not sure where, or where they are on their sort of academic development. So it just gives you a lot of interesting data for yourself and to discuss with myself and their classroom teacher. Okay, as Mr. Grant said, it can be a key, though, to unlocking a place in a certain AIG class in middle school, what they call AIG basic schools. Some schools have in the past and may still have, and the reason I say that in quotes is because sometimes I will talk to somebody from a certain school and I will be told there is flexibility. If your student is strong academically but didn't quite get the identification, then we would still give them a place in the AIG class. I've spoken to other people at the same school that says, no, it's in or out. So talk to the middle school, the people at the middle school to find out where they are, because I don't want to give you information now about a middle school that would then change tomorrow in a meeting or next week or when your students in a few years are applying to middle school. So just be aware that it can have an impact. That impact can be felt more heavily at some schools than other schools. At Washington, our philosophy is your students are on a scale. Every student needs to be challenged where they are. And if you have a student who doesn't quite get identified for AIG, doesn't mean they shouldn't be in those electives. Oftentimes those electives help lift them up, and then you see students in 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade get identified for AIG. So just something to think about. Okay, so how do we deliver our AIG services? Well, at normal schools, the students, I think, it's about 45 minutes a week.
There's options at schools. Each school has a different option. I've been to model, or I've been at both types of schools. I've pushed in classrooms, and I've heard that depending on what the school's plan is. But it's going to have this first subject area for reading. But Washington is totally different.
Yeah, that's why I defer to Ms. Sandel for that. Here. All I've known is here, where if your student is in an AIG elective, so sometimes they can be in 2 AIG electives back to back. You're getting hours and hours and hours of me, which they might always every week. So lots and lots of instruction. Also in 4th grade and 5th grade, we're going to be pulling groups out as well. It might be for reading, it might be for math, and that's all just extra. So if you add together the AIG service, it works out to be so much more than a lot of other schools. It feels like a sales pitch, but it's because I'm passionate about it. And also, like I said, you don't get the AIG electives at some other schools. So it's a lot of service. And also, of course, we're serving students from kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade in addition. So it's a very good system we have here. So typically, students in kindergarten through 2nd grade receive differentiation and enrichment opportunities via the classroom teacher. If your student's reading above grade level, the books they, I'm sure, are reading in class are above grade level, and they should be pushed because, and they will be here, the teachers here are very, very good at differentiating in the regular classroom. So just because your child may not be in an AIG elective, they should be challenged where they are all the time. A simple thing you could do at home, if you're not sure where your student is, if they're reading Percy Jackson, get them to read you a page. They shouldn't know 3 to 4 words on the page. If they read the entire page and they know every single word and they can comprehend it, that book is too easy for them. If they're missing 15, 20, 25 words, they probably aren't understanding what they're reading, even though they're like walking around with a big thick book. So that 3 to 4 word a page thing is just a simple gauge for language arts that you can use at home to see, what are they reading? You know, is this really challenging or is this too easy? And that's what is happening, of course, in our regular classrooms. So we are collaborating all the time with the teachers across the school about where your children are, in addition to just serving the AIG electives. Okay, so the 3rd grade Explorers model, I'll defer to Ms. Sandel, who's going to be teaching that this year.
So, discuss the model. This year is a great year because we're kind of piloting a new program that we summer, and it's aligned curriculum that is extension work and critical thinking skills that aligns with the curriculum of the 3rd grade. So I've got an entire year's worth of curriculum on the 3rd grade students this year. This week, I'm just starting to go into classrooms. All of your 3rd grade students will be getting sample questions for the combat. So today I'm going to use this class, and all the students take sample combat. Every verbal and quantitative figure analysis. And it was all analogies, but it was great for them to get exposed to that because when they get the test, silk samples and just how to answer the questions and how to read it. So it was a real great thing that we offered that this year, that resource to the graders. And then basically what we do is we test the students at the room, at the 3-day test. We test each day is 30 minutes. First day is all verbal skills, second day is quantitative and math skills, and third day, okay. Not the camera. Okay, and the 3rd day is figure analysis, and it's basically analogies, 2 pictures, putting together the next 2 pictures and kind of comparing them and making them match up. And so they had experience with that today, and all the other 4 classes I'll be going into in the next 4 days to give them a overview of what that's like. So once we test them, the COGAT, we get the scores back. What happens is they have to have 85% or higher in any one of the categories of the COGAT. So say they just get 85% in the verbal area. Then they move on to test on the next test, which is an achievement test. It's the Iowa test. So we analyze the scores, we meet as a team, and we go through to see which students did score 85 or higher. We've also had, in the past, where I've worked before, we've had situations where students have scored just a little bit under 85, and we've allowed them to go ahead and take the Iowa because we know that they're strong. It would be a good opportunity for them to go ahead and take the Iowa test. So sometimes that happens depending on where they score and their abilities, and we just have to decide when that time comes and when we're analyzing the scores as to who we choose for the Iowa. But usually the main goal is to have an 85% or higher in one of the areas of the test. So then once we get those scores back, we start the pull-out classes for the 3rd grade explorers. I'm sorry.
When is the Iowa? You said the October 9th, 10th, and 11th is the COGAT.
Is the COGAT, and the Iowa is early December. Mm-hmm. So between October and December, I'll be pushing into classes, and I'll be working whole groups with the entire class and doing some units with them. I'm starting out with stereotypes of fairy tales, and then I'm going to move into poetry, and I'll just be doing some units with the whole groups, and just kind of observing. We have an informal observation list that I give the teachers, and the teachers kind of have a checklist as to things, it's not scores or grades, but it's like interests, motivations, creativity, things like that. So they fill out an informal observation for the students, and we kind of evaluate them as I'm observing them and as the teachers are observing them, and we decide which students are, the ones that are really that are meeting the challenge that we're giving them, and try to challenge them with the activities we're doing with them. So when the teachers decide that, we pull some students out in small groups. And usually it's a rotating group of students. It's not always the same group of students. There might be one unit that I pull out a few, and then the next unit it's a different group of children. So they all have an opportunity, all students in 3rd grade have an opportunity that are to be able to work with these extension units. So, yes.
So when will we find out the scores from the
Probably immediately. I would think the week after the 9th. It doesn't take long for the scores to come back, does it?
Sometimes.
Oh, okay.
I have had it take a long time, and I have had it be fast, so it's very difficult.
Yeah, within a few weeks. I remember getting them, within a few weeks. And you'll get a copy of that sent home. There'll be a copy sent home. So you'll have the score. It'll be analyzed. It'll tell you what some things you can do to work with your child on different, if needed. So, and then of course, you can meet with me or meet with Mr. Baston about what your child needs.
And you were at Brooks, aren't you?
Yes,
that's why it is. Brooks is a B, and we're right down W, so it's
right. Maybe that's why
I had to wait longer than
that's
us.
probably why we got the scores so fast. I don't know, because you send it to the testing office, and then so we got it back. So, yeah.
Maybe they'll work themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, we also the units we do. I'm going to do this year. I think are going to be basically like charts. In the past, I've done like math, but because of the curriculum that's been created for us this year, I'm going to try and implement the curriculum that was devised for the 3rd grade students, so that we can you have a question?
You said it is 85% and above for the COGAT in like any one of the sections.
Any one of the
but what is the percentage for the Iowa?
Okay, once we get to the Iowa, then we have to take both tests together. We take the aptitude test and the achievement test, and they need to have a 90. We're going to get into the different gateways. We're going to get into that. That will come, but there's the score that we use is, we can get into that 95% or above. Yeah. But we retest if they have 95% in one area. we can retest, we can give them one retest. So we're going to get more in depth in that in just a minute. But that's basically the score that we use. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this can get quite confusing because the third grade testing is like a broad screen. Okay, it's the only time that I know where all of the students are tested, and it's because the data is so useful. Okay, not just for AIG identification, it's just extremely useful data to see how your children think and how they're performing, how they're developing. You can compare their third grade scores to their fifth grade scores, and you can be amazed at the way that they're developing and they're changing. So, in a nutshell, what you need to be identified AIG in terms of Wake County, and I never like putting numbers on kids and this kind of thing, but we have to talk about numbers sometimes. So you're looking for a 95th percentile in an aptitude test. Like, what could they do? What's their potential, possibly? And a 95th percentile in an achievement test. What are they doing? So you're looking for a 95 or above, 95 or above, balancing like this. That's why the 85th can confuse parents. That is just because you don't want to have the COGAT test and say, just these guys are going to take the Iowa, just a little group. You're giving the Iowa, because it's a very different test. You're reading poems, pages of writing, or you're doing math, the real math problems on a sliding scale. It's a completely different test to the COGAT. So they want to be as fair as possible, and they open the door to many more students. Any student who scores in the 85th percentile, okay? So a student might get 86th percentile and then take the Iowa and get 86th percentile, and they're fantastic scores, fantastic scores. Those students would probably be in the in-house Aig electives, but you're still like 9 percentile points off of being officially Aig identified. So there are two sort of different pathways to think about there. So you're looking for that balance. We've already gone over the COGAT there. Again, you're third grade parents, but if your child is performing strongly but doesn't get officially identified, and you're wanting to try and get that official identification, then you have an opportunity once a year, either the fall, which is just coming up around now, or October, and then the spring, which is weirdly the end of January. I don't know why, but so October or January, you can choose either of those to test in 4th grade, then again in the 5th grade, and they can carry on 6th grade, 7th grade. As soon as they're identified, then you don't have to worry about it. You've got the math identification, you might be trying to then go for the language arts identification, or you might have the language arts identification, then you want to try and get the math identification. But none of this is essential. Wherever your child, the important thing is to know where your child is performing and to know that they're going to be challenged, okay? And it's very useful for teachers, these scores, okay? So it's not anything you have to worry about whatsoever, but it is great information, certainly. So again, these, I'm not going to go too heavily into the dates, but basically in the 4th grade year, you would nominate your child. The 5th grade year, you can nominate, your children can even nominate themselves. So I've had one child nominate themselves, which is an interesting thing for them. The dates again are on the PowerPoint. And it's the same thing. The students are going to be taking the COGAT and they're going to be taking the Iowa. The COGAT is an age-based score, though. So if your child takes it now, or if they took it in 4 months' time or 2 years' time, it's going to be compared on their age, whereas the Iowa is not. Yeah. Yes. Achievement, and the COGAT is the aptitude. Yeah, and I'll show you much more in depth now. Now, what you're looking at for, and again, the people that make the decision is not just me sitting there with the scores and saying, I'll let you in, I won't let you in your school. It was sitting down in a team, myself, Ms. Sandel, Mr. Grant, the classroom teachers, all collaborating, talking with yourself as well, if you'd like to talk and have a meeting about the scores. We always like to sit down and sort of the nuts and the bolts, the percentiles, and talk things through, because it can get quite complicated. But the school-based committee, the people I mentioned. Those are the people that officially sign off. But it is essentially a score-based system. So the score-based team provide a team framework for evaluating data, so it's not just me in my little room deciding. And it's not really a decision because it's number-based anyway. The administrator, AIG teachers, staff members all get together and you make recommendations regarding AIG referral, identification, AIG services, and then you identify AIG students. Not really. We really get together, look at the scores. We do everything we can, everything the scores allow us to do. We love identifying students if we can. We feel constrained by the data sometimes, but Washington, as I said, goes way beyond that with its in-house, unofficial, unique challenge, so you could be in the Aig Electives system. But when it comes down to the scores, you know, it is a score-based system. Yes.
So statistically, how many kids special AIG programs are identified statistically in general? So let's say
It varies per school, but just and it varies per year. It just depends.
Can you ballpark?
It varies. But the piece that Mr. Basson's talking about, where we have the AIG-based committee, it's simply based on the criteria set up by Wake County for scores that students have and getting in different pathways. And he's going to show you the different pathways here on the screen. Again, they're in the PowerPoint that you have, so you can go back and look at that data. So there's no real decision where we say, well, maybe this person would really benefit. Let's go ahead and put them in. Either they have the cut score in a certain area, or they don't have the cut score. So there's no real decision beyond saying, based on the test they have, check the box, they did or did not qualify. But there are 5 different pathways. And one is an achievement test, which is basically, it looks like an EOG, or going back to 2nd grade, it looks like some of the case 21 assessments. So it's reading passages, there's math passages, and there's writing. And that's the achievement part, looking at really how they're performing overall at grade level or beyond. And then the aptitude test is the one that Ms. Sandal's talking about, that we've felt recently. It's important to help expose kids to that, because they might not be used to analogies and how analogies work. Doesn't mean their brain can't think that way, but if you've never done a test where you've had to think through how analogies work, first time you do it, you don't want it to be this AIG test. So you show students the different ways to work through analogies. But anyways, aptitude is really broader thinking, considered an IQ test in some ways, as opposed to the achievement test. But those are the 2 pieces that you take to then put together to see about qualification. He's going to walk through those paths. Mr. Lazzarano?
So in the end, how many percentage?
I said 12 to 15 is really going to depend. It's going to depend on the
way. So 30, 15, or start point, you know?
It will vary from year to year, but if you look at the percentage of kids in any given year at Washington, it's going to be around 15%.
After the school's coming, I mean, does the school have the opportunity to decide whether the kids can the AIG recognized?
Yeah, the only decision that we would have is, for example, a student gets 85th percentile and 89th, okay? The scores don't allow us to make any identification, but my goodness, they need challenge, because those are some great scores. Let's make sure they're on the list to go into their AIG electives. Exactly. Yeah, they're not officially identified. So what I'm going to go through now, the official. These are the numbers for the official, to be officially stamped AIG for Wake County. So if you go to a very strict in-out school, then you will be in. Like if you're AIG identified officially for math, you'll be in that class. If you're not, maybe that class. That's as bad as it gets. I like it when schools are, okay, well, you got 93rd percentile, obviously you should be in this class, but you're not officially. that should be the way it goes. That's the way it is at a lot of schools, but I implore you, before your students apply to middle school, call the middle school, go there, talk to the Aig teacher, talk to the classroom teacher, and find out where they will be placed, and give them 4 examples. If they scored 92nd percentile, would they be in the Aig class or not? Because 92nd percentile a few years ago identified you. Now it doesn't. Now it's 95th. So have those conversations with the middle school and make sure it's close to when you're applying, because the answer changes. I found that myself. So you're looking for, in terms of the official numbers, 95th percentile on an aptitude test like the COGAT, 95th percentile on an achievement test like the Iowa. That balance gets you officially identified. It used to be nice and simple. These are what we call the gateways. Okay, it used to be simple. Now it looks like that. Just not quite so simple. I said I'd try to make it fun. So here we go. Gateway 1, just what I said. At or above 95th percentile on the COGAT, aptitude test, 95th percentile on the Iowa. I love it when a student gets that, because I go, okay, we're done. That's the simple one. Then it gets like this. What happens if a child gets at or above 95th percentile on the COGAT? They're great working out the paper folding and the number patterns, and bird is to nest as elephant is to, I don't know that. And you can just make them up and have these conversations in your cars. It's definitely advice. So what if they blow the top off the COGAT, but then when it comes down to standard evaluating a poem or a passage of scientific writing, something goes wrong and they just don't do themselves the same justice they did on the COGAT? Well, then this is where we can do something about it. We're allowed to, so you got this COGAT, you didn't get that Iowa, I can give them an individual one-on-one test to replace the Iowa. And then I'm there one-on-one, there sort of, I'm asking questions, and there's all these kind of parts to it. They get a score, and if that score is 95 or 95th percentile or above, then you've got it. You've got the 95th on the aptitude test, the COGAT, and the 95th on the achievement test, which is called the Woodcock-Johnson. Then they are identified. That's gateway 2. They can also get the opposite, 95th percentile on the Iowa. So maybe they were freaked out by all those weird analogies and paper folding and didn't know what was happening. But when it came to doing what they do every day in school, analyze poetry, read scientific writing, and all those kind of standard math problems and things like that, they might have this, the Iowa, and just really struggle with the COGAT. Well, then we can meet together again, one-on-one, and I can replace that test or administer a replacement test here. So you've got that balance. If they get 95th percentile here, that happens to be called, it's not the, forget the Raven. The Raven's gone. It was a great test, the Raven. It was, yeah, it was just pictures. It was developed in Cambridge, I think, one of the best countries in the world. Slightly biased. Then somebody published it on the internet, and of course that was it. So we don't do that anymore. We do just this test called the RIST. So you've got the Iowa test, and then you've got the aptitude test, which is the RIST. 95th percentile balance, again, gets you identified. Then, yeah. Yeah, these are official gateways. These are the ways that we're allowed to identify. This is like, we can't do that, but maybe we can do that. Gateway 3, you've got that some, like, imagine Einstein, who threw violins, don't listen, Barley, threw violins at his teacher, but had an amazing mind. You give him a COGAT, and of course, 90, it's crazy if there was 100th percentile. But would he want to sit down and answer poetry questions? No, he'd probably just screw it up and throw it in the trash can. He would get identified in Gateway 3. So he would have got at or above the 98th percentile on the COGAT, and maybe just didn't even do the Iowa. Still get identified because it's just so good that you just, that's it. No more tests, you're done. Or you might get the super, super, super amazing test taker, studious student who...
Sorry,
yeah.
Can you go back to the previous? I didn't quite understand this one. What
Yeah.
did you say on this one?
So 98th percentile on the COGAT scores grouped together, and they would get identified outright. So not 95th anymore, we're talking about the 98th.
So that's more achievement test.
Yeah. This was so high that
So high.
you're done.
So you don't need to take
Yeah,
the whole test.
it's, yeah. Oh yeah, it should always take it. Yeah, because again, these tests are great for information. It gets a little bit more technical, which we don't want to go into too much. But if the 98th percentile is in just the quantitative, then they would be identified in the math, because the verbal skills might not be there. But those are things we can worry about later. But you want to, at school, I would, if you're given an opportunity for your child to take a test, you may as well take it, as long as they're not getting sort of stressed out and anything. It gives you great feedback. Yeah, these are only short tests. So what about if not the Einstein, but the opposite personality does amazingly well on the Iowa, but just didn't show anything at all in the, or not quite in the COGAT. So they're just amazing at, you know, the math problems, the poetry analysis, the scientific writing analysis, and all those other things. That doesn't get them identified. 98th percentile still doesn't get them identified. You have to match it with an EOG score. So those students, if your child got 98th percentile on the Iowa, but not the COGAT, and I gave that second test and they still didn't quite get it, they go into like a pending state. Sounds a bit weird. They go into a paused state till they take their EOG, and that is another chance. Then we wait, we get that score back, and if that score is enough, then they can get identified, because you've got 2 achievement tests that show that they deserve that identification, and those scores align. And then Gateway 4, you've got students scoring at above 95th percentile on a COGAT, at above 95th percentile on the EOG, can also be identified. So I said it was confusing. You've got all these different gateways and different access points. The best thing to do, your students are going to be taking these tests anyway. When you get the COGAT score in, you'll get a letter. You'll see these different scores, composite scores, and subset scores, and things like that. Basically, if they are, you'll receive a letter that says, if they score above the 85th percentile, that they're going to be taking the Iowa. Wait, let them take the Iowa, and then if you would like a meeting, we can certainly meet. And it's, if you didn't meet and you didn't understand any of it, it all happens anyway. So we're there desperately trying to go through the scores, and we're making sure nothing's overturned, nothing's missed, no rock is left overturned, or not turned, it's late. Then we will all meet together, and the student will be given every chance they can possibly get. So even if it sounds like I'm talking Russian and these numbers, and even if you forgot about this meeting, even if you forgot it ever happened, they will still be given every opportunity, and you must go home tonight knowing that we're doing everything we can within Wake County's number guidelines to get them identified. And you'll be given letters along the way that lets you know how they're doing. But if you want to meet and talk about the scores, then that's definitely, you know, something that I would encourage. That's Gateway 4, and then Gateway 5 is kind of a confusing gateway that I won't cover now because it changes all the time, and it's based on portfolio evidence, and it's incredibly difficult to get a child identified by Gateway 5. Typically, if a student can produce a portfolio that will convince the people at central office to identify them, then they would have got the other scores, because they're tough over there if they're watching this. So the differentiation, you'll receive different bits of information. I won't go over this too much. If your child's identified, you'll receive basically a plan that just outlines how your children served. You already know they're going to be served in the Aig electives, and every year it's different. There are different push-in where we're taking groups of kids, or pull out or push-in groups where they're working with us, and that's all extra as well. This piece of paper, the Differentiated Education Plan, basically just says what we do here at Washington to serve your students. There's all these different names cluster grouping, flexible grouping, curriculum compacting, differentiated instructional units. Basically, we're providing challenge. The teachers at this school are experts at differentiating and providing challenge and making it fun and making it real world. But you don't want to just separate the identified students off either, which is why we love our in-house Aig Electives, where you've got students from 3rd grade working with students from 5th grade, doing amazing sort of real life projects. So that's the real challenge. Time was years and years ago, not at this school, but certainly there were many complaints in Britain and across the world that students would, you know, be identified and then they blow the top off of scores and SAT scores and everything, and then they go to college and they're blowing the top off, and then they get a job. And the feedback from the business community was, thanks, but these students can't do anything useful. They can do a test and they can calculate numbers, but my goodness, you give them a project with an open-ended challenge, and they're like, how do I do it? What do I do? Because they're used to being babysat. Not at this school. At this school, they're doing real life, rigorous, challenging, from kindergarten. By the time they get to 5th grade and go off to middle school, the feedback from the middle schools are like, wow, these kids, you can give them something and they'll run with it, which is a super, super important skill. So, who's involved in success? Obviously, the student in the middle, the Aig teachers, I should put an S there, classroom teachers, school counsellors, because this can be an emotional process. Children are not in boxes unaware of their scores, and they're going to different places, Aig electives and non-Aig electives, and it can get quite confusing. So if you, in any of your conversation, notice that they're getting upset about tests or a bit emotionally sort of worried about any of this, then speak to me, Ms. Grant, Ms. Sandel, of course, the school counsellor, Ms. Madonna as well, because they're not immune to thinking about, worrying about these kind of things. Aig Central Services staff, and of course yourself, the parents as well. So that's Aig. And last year, I spoke about Aig and SSA together. I purposely not mentioned SSA because a lot of parents still get them confused. So just at the end of this presentation, I'd just like to briefly go over SSA, which is a completely separate thing. It's entirely removed from Aig identification. It has nothing to do with Aig identification, other than myself and Ms. Sandel are given work to handle it, which makes it more confusing because it's the same people. That's literally taking a test, I think next April. And if you show you already know 80%, or for language, that's for math, or 85% of the language arts material for the year you're about to go into after the summer, then you could jump that. And a 4th grade student going into 4th grade might join the 5th grade teacher for math, or the 5th grade teacher for language arts. They would jump over 4th grade. But that's an entirely separate thing. So just wanted to make sure that was said. Okay, so as Mr. Grant said, and I should put Ms. Sandel's email here as well, but just email us with any questions or come in. We're always available to answer your questions. This can be a confusing process. I like the way they're getting tested in 3rd grade, because then you've got many years. You've got 4th grade and 5th grade to look at the scores. I often see students who score in the 75th percentile, and then by 5th grade they're getting in the 96th, and there was never anything to worry about. These are children all developing at different ages. They're very young. 3rd graders are tested more than any students I've ever met. So it's a process. And it's nothing to worry about. These are all opportunities. That's the way we like to look at it. Opportunities to further challenge your students. Thank you.
People who are watching from home, if you have a question, you can email Mr. Bastin, and I'm looking at his email, so I'll read the question out loud. And it's abastin@wcpss.net. And folks here at home or here at school, what questions do you have as far as any of the content that Mr. Bastin has covered today?
I have a question. So 95, 98%, that shows a kind of 12 marks of error there. How many questions each test have, or how many lines? Because, you know, to get to 98%, If there are 20 questions, you'll be smart. 10 questions, and then you're done for sure. So how many lines or how many questions? How many problems?
Yeah, in terms of the COGA, it's short sections. I'll go to Miss Sandel, if you want
It's
to.
about,
I'll go to the third slide.
it's, so the verbal analogies, I think there's about 20, and then the quantitative, there might be about 15. I don't know the exact amount, but it's more than 10. Yeah, I think it's between 10 and 20.
Yeah, you're covering verbal analogies, sentence completion, verbal classification. So on day one, it's 10-minute bursts, and there are quite a few questions, but about 20 questions in each section, but in very short bursts. So usually we say to the students, take your time, like the EOG, don't worry, just check your work. Not with the COGA. You've got to go in, answer, don't leave any unanswered, you just answer it. And that's why the bubbling practice that Ms. Sandel's doing is so important. Yeah,
10 minutes.
10, 10, 10. So they're done in 30 minutes on day one. And then number analogies, 10, 10, 10. And then day 3, figure matrices, paper folding, figure classification. So it does work out to be quite a lot of questions. And again, the COGA, in terms of like the data and the analysis and whether it's a good test, there for decades they've used the COGA and reissued the COGA. So it's supposed to be a very good indicator, and it's the test that we have to administer.
So would be 10 minutes, but 20, 40, 60, 120, probably 150.
Yeah,
I know you're trying to go through and compute and think that through, which is great. But I wouldn't spend, Mr. Lazzarano, a lot of time trying to break that down. And also the key is what Mr. Baston talked about is we don't want to overstress our kids. That there's a lot of great opportunities at Washington. Your child's going to be challenged and they're going to be successful. So kids already, just through the testing that we do in Wake County and in North Carolina, there's a lot of pressure around that. And you want to de-emphasize this, which is you're still going to have great opportunities no matter whether you qualify or not as you go through Washington. And the same will be true really as you move through middle school. When your child's in 5th grade, and who has this child right now in middle or high school? Is anybody? So, when it gets to 5th grade, they're going to have a form that goes out and it talks about the math classes you can qualify for and kind of that pathway. And you can request your child to be in advanced math, and based on their scores, the same information is true. How your child qualifies for certain levels of math classes in 6th grade is independent of whether they qualified for AIG. It's based on their performance on EOG and their grades in 5th grade. So whether or not they qualify does not determine that. SSA is another way they move through advanced math, because by the time you're in 5th grade for SSA math, you're taking online 6th grade math. And then when you're in 6th grade, you move to compacted math. Both of that's independent of whether you qualify for AIG. Ms. Brunson, you had a question? There's no paying for retesting. Some families choose to test their child outside privately and get scores. They then present those to central office. Central office meets with the parent. Depending on the scores your child has, it's not an automatic qualification. So sometimes people will go and they'll get outside testing and the person will say the child's qualified AIG, but they're not meeting the same criteria set aside by Wake County. So families can always choose to do that process. It's expensive and I don't recommend it, but that's always something independent. But as far as what we do in Wake County and here at Washington, all kids take it, you get the data and you can look at it. And then if your child doesn't qualify this year and you decide that you want to pursue it, a year from now when they're in 4th grade, you can request to Mr. Baston that they take the assessments again, and you can do that. And you can do that a year later in 5th grade as well.
Of the same format on the years.
Are the assessments when you give them to the?
Yeah, it's just a higher level. It's just ramped up at a high level. It's exactly the same subsections, exactly the same question types. One thing I would advise, this is my personal opinion, if I had a third grader and I wanted to do some practice, I might be, if I was on Amazon shopping for practice books, maybe I'd practice fourth grade, because then what can happen, that's, for Aig identification, they're supposed to be working like a year above. All that can happen is they see the test they actually take and they feel good about it because it's a little bit easier than what they practiced at home. So you don't have to do any practicing, but if you did, always practice at a higher level so that they then de-stress when they see the real test. That seems to work pretty well. Yeah. No, I wish. No, that's, and I know you would never do this, but that's what happened with the Raven. I think it got published online, so they're extremely strict. I have to have it under lock and key, and Miss Hyder has it under lock and key. And no, the Coget is protected. It's, yeah, it's kind of like Area 51. if you can get into the Coget, then get into Area 51. Yeah, I mean, you can. What we get, not a question by question breakdown, but you definitely can see the scores in the different subsections. So you can tell whether they're particularly strong at visual spatial processing, which indicates they're very visual. Maybe they can handle geometry very well. Maybe they struggle with the number patterns or the quantitative, or maybe the verbal analogies were a strong suit for them. So you can see those numbers and kind of gauge what's going on. Other questions? No. Yeah, it's supposed to, they have a paper to write, like to do the number patterns, but they're not for the paper folding exercise. The paper has to be held back. They're not allowed to actually fold the book or anything, because it's supposed to show how they can resemble things sort of visually in their mind. Not during the paper folding section, but for the other sections, they're allowed paper, loose leaf paper. Yeah. No, it's a sliding scale. It's like this for the Coget and the Iowa, is a sliding scale. So particularly like the Iowa math, they might do really well here and then sort of drop off there or drop off there. And where they drop off shows their achievement level. And the Coget is very much based on their, so it ramps up in terms of difficulty as you go through question 1 to question 20 of each section. And then that's compared against, so you might have two students who answered exactly the same, but one might have an August birthday, one might have like an April birthday, and their scores are different because it's an age-rated score. So definitely best to wait for the scores to come in, and then we can analyze. Percentile, yeah, normed with all the students across, yeah, across the country. Yeah, all the students, like nationally normed, and that norming. No, not at all. Yeah.
So basically, what shows that basically Coget is an IQ test, right?
Traditionally, that would be the name given to it. Yeah.
Will that make a difference in the way somebody else
I'm just going to repeat the question for people at home who might not hear the question. So the question for people at home was, does my child's age impact their score? Because Mr. Bassam was just talking about kids answering the test and answering the same questions the same way, getting the same ones right, but it can have slightly different scores based on age because it's normed based on age.
Yeah, but they put a lot of time to make it fair. So what she would gain from being younger, if she got the same score as somebody a year older, she would, same number of questions correct. She's had less time to develop. So it's supposed to be even, it's supposed to even things out. That's why they age rate the Coget. So it's supposed to be fair. And in terms of, is it an IQ test? Not really, that's the traditional name possibly given to them, but IQ tests, perfect IQ tests, should be that you can't practice for them. Practice makes no difference. But yeah, I don't see that with the Coget. I think exposure to these question types does make a difference. So in that way, it's not a perfect IQ test.
So are they practicing at school?
Well, that's what Mr. Sando was saying, was really the exposure part. So it's not mastering content. It's just really understanding the structure of questions. So when they first see them, they understand how to work through them, what's being asked of the child.
So it's the content that's eighth grade, not the
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Iowa,
type of.
yeah, a student taking the Iowa in 4th grade, they take a different Iowa, but it's not age rated like the COGA.
I'm going to go ahead and go offline because it's about 7:05. If families here have a few more questions, I'm happy to stay and answer them, as well as Mr. Baston. Thank you so much for coming tonight, both Ms. Sandel, and we'll step back here so they can see us, and Mr. Baston are great resources. Their emails are on their website. Always feel free to contact them when you have the scores. If you want to talk through them, please do that. But most importantly, reassure your child. We've got great kids here at Washington. They're going to continue to do great things. We just want to make sure that they're challenged wherever they are, in their homeroom class, in an elective class, in an AIG class. Ultimately, we want to grow your kids. Thank you so much.